Somewhere, beneath the waves, a city is waiting. Golden towers ringed by canals, temples of silver and shining bronze. A civilization so advanced it dwarfed our own. Until, in a single terrible night, the sea rose up and swallowed it whole. You know this city. Everyone does. It is Atlantis, the lost continent, the drowned empire that treasure hunters and dreamers have chased for more than 100 years. But follow that legend back, past the movies, past the maps, past the theories, all the way to its source, and something strange happens. The trail does not fade into the ancient mists. It stops, abruptly, at a single man sitting in Athens around 360 BCE with a pen in his hand. His name was Plato. And the truth about Atlantis is not that we lost it, it is that we misread it. Because Atlantis was never a place. It was a story. And the real story its author told is far stranger and far better than any sunken gold.
To find the real Atlantis, you don't need a submarine. You need a library. Because every version of this story you have ever heard descends from just two documents, two dialogues written by Plato around 360 BCE. We call them the Timaeus and the Critias. That is the entire ancient record of Atlantis. There is no older source, no Egyptian scroll, no earlier Greek poet, no lost chronicle. Homer never mentioned it. Herodotus never breathed a word of it. Before Plato, in all the surviving writing of the ancient world, Atlantis simply does not exist. So here is the first thing the legend gets wrong. Atlantis is not an ancient myth that Plato wrote down. It is a story that Plato wrote. And he was far too clever to say, "Here is a tale I invented." Instead, he wrapped it in a chain of witnesses. The story, he tells us, came from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais, who told it to a traveling Athenian statesman named Solon, who passed it down through his family until it reached a man named Critias, who recites it at last to Socrates. It sounds like history, but scholars recognize it for what it is, a storyteller's device as old as storytelling. This really happened. A wise man swore it to me. That is not the language of proof. It is the opening line of a fable. So what does the story actually say? Read the dialogues and a magnificent picture unfolds. Plato writes of an island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, out in the open Atlantic. An island, he says, larger than Libya and Asia combined. Upon it stood a naval empire of immense wealth, its capital laid out in perfect rings of land and water that had conquered its way across the western Mediterranean. And then Plato gives us a date, and this is where a careful listener should stop and frown. He sets all of this 9,000 years before Solon's own lifetime. 9,000 years! That places the empire of Atlantis at roughly 9,600 years before the Common Era, deep in the Stone Age. To put that in perspective, writing itself would not be invented for another 6,000 years. There were no cities, no kingdoms, no navies, not anywhere on Earth. A monumental sea empire in that age is not merely unlikely, it is flatly impossible. And then Plato writes, it ended. In a single day and night of misfortune, the whole island of Atlantis sank beneath the sea and disappeared. Not eroded, not abandoned. Gone, overnight, swallowed whole. Hold on to that phrase, a single day and night, because it is not the language of geology. It is the language of judgment. Here is the question almost nobody stops to ask. Why? Why would a serious philosopher invent a doomed island empire, give it an impossible date, and drown it in a single night? Because Plato was not writing an adventure. He was making an argument. Look at how the Timaeus opens, by recalling a conversation from the day before, a description of the perfect society, the ideal state. And if that sounds familiar, it should. It is the vision from Plato's most famous work, The Republic. And then Plato does something brilliant. He says, in effect, let us watch that ideal city tested against a real enemy. And so he invents the enemy.
Atlantis is not the hero of this story. Atlantis is the villain. Everything Plato feared a state could become: rich, proud, expansionist, drunk on its own power. Against it stands not Athens as it truly was, but an idealized ancient Athens, virtuous, disciplined, brave, who defeats the arrogant giant. Then the gods themselves pass sentence, and the sea erases it. Do you see it now? Atlantis was built to be destroyed. It is a thought experiment given a coastline, a warning about what happens when a great power forgets its virtue and is consumed by greed and pride, by the flaw the Greeks called hubris. The sinking is not a disaster, it is the moral. Atlantis is not a place Plato lost, it is a lesson Plato wrote, and he aimed it squarely at his own proud imperial city.
And now we come to the strangest detail of all, the one that gives the whole game away. If Atlantis were a true historical account, you would expect Plato to finish it. He didn't. The second dialogue, the Critias, does not end. It stops mid-sentence. In its final passage, the god Zeus gathers all the gods together to decide the island's punishment. Zeus opens his mouth to speak, and the text simply breaks off. And when he had gathered them together, he said, and then nothing. Blank page. The most famous lost city in human history was never even finished being written. Its author reached the very moment of judgment, set down his pen, and walked away. Why he stopped, we will never know. But there is no ending to find, because the ending was never written. And here is the final witness. Plato's own student, who studied in his school for nearly 20 years, appears to have seen straight through it. His name was Aristotle. And Aristotle, by all accounts, regarded Atlantis as something his teacher had simply invented. There is a famous line, often attributed to him, that the man who dreamed up Atlantis is the same man who sank it. It is a perfect line, and in honesty, a little too perfect. It appears nowhere in Aristotle's surviving work, and reaches us only secondhand, centuries later, through the geographer Strabo. But the underlying judgment is solid. The earliest known skeptic of Atlantis was not a modern scientist. It was the student sitting in Plato's own classroom.
So if Atlantis was understood from the very start as a philosopher's fable, how did it ever become a real lost continent that people devote their lives to finding? For more than 2,000 years, mostly it didn't. Ancient and medieval readers largely took Atlantis for what it was, Plato's parable. Not everyone. Even in antiquity, a few, like Plato's follower Crantor, wondered if it might be true. The story has always been seductive. It fooled clever minds long before it fooled ours. But the idea of Atlantis as a literal findable place is not ancient at all. It is startlingly modern, and it has a birthday. In 1882, an American politician from Minnesota named Ignatius Donnelly published a book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. In it, he argued that Plato's story was not only true, but the key to everything, that a real Atlantis had once existed, and that every great civilization on Earth, from Egypt to the Americas, descended from its drowned survivors. It was, to be blunt, pseudo-archaeology, and scientists rejected it almost at once. But it didn't matter. The book was a sensation. Donnelly's fantasy was seized on by occult writers, most famously Helena Blavatsky, who folded Atlantis into a whole mystical theology of lost races. From there, it flowed into novels, film, and television, until Atlantis became the beating heart of an entire lost civilization genre. So when you hear that Atlantis was real, remember whose voice you are truly hearing. Not Plato's, a 19th century politician's.
But set the history of the myth aside for a moment, and ask the simplest possible question. Could it be true anyway? Could a continent the size of Libya and Asia combined have sunk beneath the Atlantic and left no trace at all? Here, modern science gives an answer that is not cautious, not hedged, not "we cannot be sure." It is a flat, plain no. We understand now how the surface of the Earth actually behaves. The great plates of the crust drift and grind against one another over millions of years. Continents do not drop into the ocean overnight. There is no mechanism anywhere in geology that could sink a landmass that size in a single day. And we have looked. The floor of the Atlantic has been mapped in detail, and it is not hiding a drowned kingdom.
It is ordinary ocean crust, young, thin, and utterly unremarkable. Every so often, someone announces underwater ruins, geometric shapes on the seabed, walls, roads, and every time, on closer inspection, they turn out to be natural rock formations, shaped by nothing more mysterious than physics. This is not a case where the experts are split and the truth lies somewhere between. On the question of a real sunken Atlantic continent, there is no serious scholarly debate. The rocks have spoken, and their verdict is silence. And yet, there is one thread of this story that real scholars have tugged at, carefully, with the caveats up front. Not where is Atlantis, but a gentler question. Could some real event, buried in the deep memory of the Greeks, have given Plato a seed to grow his fable from? There is one genuine candidate. Long before Plato, in the Bronze Age, a brilliant civilization flourished in the Aegean, the Minoans, centered on the island of Crete, wealthy, sophisticated seafarers. And around 1600 BCE, the exact date is still debated, somewhere between roughly 1650 and 1600, the volcanic island of Thera, which we now call Santorini, exploded. It was one of the largest eruptions in human history. It buried an entire Minoan town under ash and is thought to have hurled tsunamis against the shores of Crete, helping to tip that civilization into decline. A powerful sea people, humbled almost overnight by a catastrophe from the water. You can hear the echo. First suggested in 1909 and developed by the archaeologist Spiridon Marinatos in 1939, the idea has a serious following. But, and this matters more than the echo, it is a possibility, not an answer. And the problems are enormous. Plato's date is off by some 7,500 years. His geography is wrong. Thera lies east in the Aegean, not out beyond Gibraltar. And there is no proof Plato had ever even heard of the eruption. At most, it is a faint, distant memory that may have tinted a detail or two. It is not the lost city. No one has found the lost city, because there isn't one.
So there is no continent to raise, no golden city beneath the waves, no ruins waiting for the right expedition. And to a certain kind of dreamer, that sounds like a disappointment. It isn't, because the real story is the better one. What we have is not a treasure map, but something far rarer. A window into the mind of one of the greatest thinkers who ever lived. Around 360 BCE, a philosopher built an entire civilization out of words, gave it rings of gold, a mighty fleet, and a proud, corrupted heart, for the single purpose of watching it drown. And he did it to warn his own city. No power is so great that arrogance cannot sink it, no empire too rich to rot from within. That warning is not a lost fact about the ancient past. It is a mirror, held up to every generation for 2,400 years. And here is the quiet irony at the heart of it all. Plato wrote a warning against chasing the wrong things, and for more than a century, we have answered it by chasing the wrong thing, combing the seafloor for his metaphor, hunting for the map when he was holding out the lesson. Atlantis was never a place to find. It was a warning, in the shape of a story we were meant to understand, not excavate. Next time on Myths and History, we follow that same trail again, but further back and stranger still. We have just watched a 19th century writer turn a philosopher's fable into a lost continent. Next, we will watch a 20th century writer turn the gods of ancient Sumer into visitors from the stars. The strange journey of the Anunnaki, from clay tablets to alien myth. Until then, if you want to understand how the world really works, and how our oldest stories still shape it, stay with us and subscribe. The Codex closes until the next story is written.